Hi, everybody. My name is Tony Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. I'm joined today by my co-host, Seamus McDonough, retired boxer, actor, producer, and entrepreneur. And a very special guest is joining us today. He's a retired fighter pilot and test pilot for the military, a U.S. Navy captain, commander of 3 expeditions to the International Space Station, and a member of the year-long mission to the space station. So he's an astronaut who lived a year in space. I'd like you to welcome, I'm very excited to say, Scott Kelly to the podcast. Welcome, Scott. So I guess I wanted to begin with, I read your book, and I mean it's an amazing read from beginning to end, and I loved how you set it out. I mean, it truly is set in a back and forth way in the chapters. Like on one hand, you kind of telling the tale of how you became an astronaut from your early years, and on the next chapter, you're in that, you're in this at the space station for your year in space. So I really loved how you laid it out. But I was struck by a story and early on in the book. And I mean, I read a book once about choices, right? And how choices matter and impact. And you tell a story about you and your brother mailing a piece of mail that your mom sent you to the mailbox with when you were maybe 5 years old, I think, little. And it really struck me because it says so much about how you can be in the same spot at the same time and really be at a crossroads. Like, one person you can make one decision or the other, and it can truly impact your life. Could you tell that story?
Yeah, well, we were little kids. We lived in West Orange, off of. I understand, like a lot of your listeners may be from New Jersey, off of Valley Road. And my mother wanted us to go to the mailbox and mail a letter, and she gave us the instructions on how to do that. You walk down the street to the corner, you cross at the corner. You come back down the street to where the mailbox is, you mail the letter, and then you retrace your steps. And when we got to the mailbox, I remember my brother, Mark, my twin brother, saying, "Oh, I'm not walking all the way back there. I'm going to just cross in the middle of the street." And I said, "Well, I'm going to do what Mom said," and went back to the corner. And as I'm crossing the way I was supposed to, I hear the brakes slam on this car and impact, and see this little person, which was my brother, fly up into the air, and wound up with a trip to the hospital and a concussion. I think he stayed overnight. Yeah, so that could have been the end of him, and it would have had a pretty dramatic effect on all of our lives. And you wonder how my future would have been impacted. Would I have still went on to become an astronaut someday? Who would have been in his place at NASA? So yeah, like you say, decisions have and choices have consequences.
Well, you've certainly been faced with a lot of big ones in your lifetime. I mean, your story is an amazing story. You start off, I would guess, and I hate to describe you this way, but perhaps an underachiever early on, and then
That's pretty good way to describe it.
and then suddenly you're struck, like you have that thunderbolt moment, right? You see a book and you're drawn to the book and you start reading it, and you found what you want to do. Yeah. Could you tell us about that moment?
Well, I was in college. I was always a bad student growing up. I couldn't pay attention, didn't know how to study, didn't do well. Mostly, I think, because I probably had have some form of ADD or ADHD that made it hard for me to just sit still and pay attention. That was the case all the way through college, and I was still doing the same poor performance in college like I did all along in my whole academic career. I wasn't going to class. I'm not doing any homework, not paying attention, not doing well at all, really on the fast track to first year college dropout. And happened to come across, or I go into the bookstore one day to buy, I don't know, gum or something, not a book. was not a big reader, but I saw this book on the end of the aisle. It was kind of highlighted there, and it had a cool cover, I thought, and I'm holding it up for those people that are listening. And it just really interested me. So I read the back flap, or where the book is described, and paged through it a little bit. Then I, took my gum money, bought this book, and went back to my dorm room and basically led there for the next, 3 days without moving. And just reading the stories of the fighter pilots that became later the test pilots that later became the original Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts. And the book was The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe. And, I just recognized like traits that these guys had that I felt like I had in myself, with only one exception. And that is, I was not a good student and I couldn't do my homework. But I thought, if I could just fix that one thing about me, learn how to study and pay attention, maybe I could go and, fly airplanes in the Navy. Maybe if not the Navy, maybe the Air Force. That'd be easier. You don't land on a ship. Maybe a test pilot, maybe quite even possibly an astronaut someday. And, it's pretty easy to think, that 18-year-old kid reads book, decides he or she's going to become an astronaut. That's really a, kind of a giant leap, maybe. But in retrospect, for me, what it was a bunch of much, smaller, manageable steps, one built upon the other, that culminated in almost 18 years later to the day from when I read this book at 18. I was flying in space for the first time. A pretty remarkable comeback.
For certain. I mean, that's the second time that a book, I think, impacted you, based upon my reading of your book, when you were in space for a year. And that's a very long time. I believe the longest anyone's ever spent in space. So you were at the so you were at the space station for a year, and you brought with you a book, Shackleton's Voyage, I think it was.
It's actually called Endurance also.
Oh, okay.
Part of the inspiration for my title of my book. Yeah.
And you would read that when you were feeling at your worst, right? It gave you motivation that things could always be worse.
Yeah, I brought it with me for that very purpose, that if, the living conditions or the situation ever got really bad, which is always the possibility when you're in a situation like that in space. But if they ever got bad and I ever felt like kind of down on myself, or down, depressed or whatever for the situation I find myself in, I would just open up this book. Alfred Lansing was the writer of this book, Endurance, that was about Ernest Shackleton's failed attempt to reach to cross the South Pole from one side of the continent to the other. And it's just an incredible story of survival and leadership, that in his failure, he found great success in that he was able to keep his crew, all of them, over 50 people, I think, alive for almost 2 years, and rescued themselves basically, and didn't lose one single person. So yeah, they had it pretty bad, much worse than I did.
For certain. And I just have to ask you some of the particulars that I know everyone's going to be wondering. You talk about having to eat in space, and what a wild ride that was, a gravityless meal. Can you tell our listeners?
Well, when everything floats, it makes a lot of things more challenging to do. Most things really, with a few exceptions, like moving things that are really heavy because they no longer have weight, or, getting your body in kind of unique positions to be able to repair things. Think about maybe hooking up a TV or something when you're trying to, get your hand behind it, like sometimes challenging. But if you can turn yourself into different positions, it's a lot easier. So those two things are easier. Everything else is more difficult because things float and things float away, and you have to have them secured or velcroed or taped or put away. So even eating is a challenge, where you just have to be very deliberate and very organized, so you don't lose your spoon. Hey, Seamus, are you like the color man, or what do you do? Sitting there being
I'm
quiet.
Tony's Ed McMahon.
Okay. The silent Ed McMahon.
The silent Ed McMahon, yeah. Well, Ed doesn't say much, so. Great to meet you, Scott.
Yeah. Hey, sweetie. I was wondering what you were doing.
Taking notes.
He'd be the right person to take notes about. I mean, there were so many things that happened to your body, spending the year up there in space. You talk about the reaction to your body when you returned, and the reaction to your body being up there. I mean, the little things that I didn't know, like if you didn't exercise, you were just going to lose bone mass. I mean,
your bones would turn to dust without exercise.
Up in space, and that's I just think amazing. People don't realize that, I guess, the impact gravity has. Even the story you were telling about when you would watch a movie, it didn't make any difference what position you were in, and your body feels the same whether you're mock lying down or standing there, but yet you had the tendency to lie down, to simulate lying down, I guess, in space, just to watch a movie.
Yeah, it's a weird thing that in space, for whatever reason, when people watch a movie, like we had this big screen, we would on the weekends sometimes, unfold and set up. And when if you're like watching, like we also had a projector with a smaller screen, and you're just floating around or you're eating or something. You're basically, most stuff you do, you're upright. But for whatever reason, when people watch movies, like settle in to watch a long thing on the projector TV, they tend to just all of a sudden like float backwards and lean back as if they're lying down on like a recliner, which makes no sense because there's no real reason to be in that position other than it's something in our brain that makes it more comfortable, I think, to, when we're used to watching a film, you generally do it lying back or down. So it's just kind of an odd observation of mine from my time in space.
And your dreams, you seem to have vivid dreams while you were in space. And a lot of times they were floating over the Earth. I thought that was kind of odd.
Yeah, when I flew a long flight prior to this year-long one of 154 days, I think. And when I got back, the psychologist, they asked me, did I have any dreams? And I said, yeah, I did. And they said, well, what were they? Were they like space dreams or Earth dreams, or what were they? And I was like, I don't know. I don't remember. So this time when I flew, I made an effort to write them down. And yeah, they're just about as crazy as dreams on Earth. And yeah, interestingly enough, in the beginning of the mission, they were more Earth-based dreams. And as I was in space longer, they became more, grounded in space, I guess you could say. And as I was getting closer to home, I started dreaming more about Earth again. But yeah, they were about as crazy as you can imagine.
And when you say floating, I mean, are we talking like Superman-ish, like you're just kind of soaring in the sky above?
No, more like I would say like a Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future on a skateboard, kind of floating.
That's so fast.
People don't fly. If you're a brand new space flyer, you fly around like Superman. But if you're experienced, you kind of stay more upright, like Homo sapien, maybe.
Is that the actual, I see in the background there, is that your actual uniform?
A spacesuit from my
Spacesuit, I'm sorry.
first long duration flight.
Wow, that's incredibly cool.
Good
Um,
souvenir.
it's yeah, that's some
I always
souvenir.
get a- I always get a 10 on Room Raider for my room background because of that spacesuit.
It doesn't get much cooler than that. That's every boy's dream, right? Every little Seamus, right? Every little boy's dream.
My dream, yeah, totally, yeah.
I thought
Any
your dream
so
was to. I thought your dream was to beat up Evander Holyfield.
well, I got him a few shots. I got him a few shots. Yeah, of course. Everyone wants to go to space. I remember being in Ireland, because I was raised in Ireland and came here as a teenager. But uh, the question I always, I'm in the film business also, and the question I always love to ask people is, yeah, part of screenwriting is to have interesting characters. Is how do you solve your problems?
What kind of problems?
Any problems you have, like. Personally, I'm also a sober Irishman, 25 years sober, and I apply the 12 steps every day to my life. So that's kind of sort of a spiritual solution. Uh, but yeah, I mean, like, um, it's how you find out how a person, what makes a person tick, what motivates people, what did you have a dominant father? How was your life growing up?
I talk a little bit about my father in my book and my parents' relationships, but for me, I think problem solving. I'm pretty like scientific engineering oriented, and I just try to look at things very objectively.
Mm,
Uh, look at all the different options and choose the one that makes the most sense at the time.
mm.
Not the too
Well,
fancy.
yeah. Mm. And
Well,
what's your main motivator in life, you think?
Um, Well, before I left NASA, I was just trying to do extraordinarily interesting things in aviation and space flight. I became an astronaut not because I wanted to fly in space, but because I wanted to fly the space shuttle, which was the
Mm,
most complicated aerospace vehicle ever built. And for me, it was that motivated me. It was not some idealistic cause. I mean, certainly serving my country was important. I was in the Navy. I thought space flight was important for our country as well and for
mm,
society in general. But for me, really, it was about the challenge of it. And I guess maybe I'm motivated by challenges. Now it's a little bit different because my work is much less technical. So
mm,
my motivation is not as high as it once was
mm,
because the
mm,
consequences are not as great of making a
mm.
mistake. When you risk everything, your life, your crew members' lives, that is motivation enough alone to do a very, very good and thorough job.
Yeah, your life is really always on the line, isn't it? Up there in space, huh?
Yeah.
Always, always. That's stressful. Any repercussions physically or emotionally, you think, from
I think people that fly in space, have a different perspective on the Earth, on the environment, on humanity. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of people, report this. Just seeing how fragile the atmosphere looks and how parts of the planet are almost always covered in pollution. The deforestation of the rainforest was obvious over the 17 years I flew in space. So it changes that way. Most people, I think. Physically, I have some structural changes in the anatomy of my eyes. Nothing serious, but that is a result of being in space for long periods of time. I also have some genetic changes, but so far no ill effects. So hopefully that'll remain that way.
how
what
did you,
kind of, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of genetic changes?
7% of my gene expression change. So our genes are DNA, RNA, proteins, and The expression is basically like whether they are activated or deactivated, turned on or turned off. I guess it's like a light switch. They can go either way. And basically it controls all of our, physiology. So a gene expressing a different way might have a detrimental effect. It may not. Maybe it could be a good thing. We just don't know.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how'd you make that decision to go up into space for a year? I mean, what was going through your mind in making that decision? I mean, that was a huge chunk of time to be up in space. No one had done it, before that. You didn't know the outcome or if you'd survive or what the impact to your body would be. I mean, how do you pull the Band-Aid off of that and just make that choice?
Well, people have spent longer in space. There have been cosmonauts that have spent longer than I have. I'm the person who spent the longest time in space for a non-Russian, basically an American, but also non-Russian person. Initially I wasn't all that interested in it because 6 months is a long time and to be in space, and that was the hardest part about it, was the duration. So when the idea came up originally, I wasn't all that interested, but like a lot of things, as you get further away from them, you kind of forget the hard part and remember the good part. And I did want to fly in space again. I wanted to be different, wanted to be challenging. So, what would be more challenging than spending more than twice as long as my previous flight? And, I was right. It was challenging, but it was definitely worth the time and effort. As far as the risk is concerned, there's risks in everything we do. I mean, with this pandemic, there's risk in going out of your house, right? And but you weigh the benefits, the pros and the cons, and in the end, it made sense for me to do this, and I have no regrets at all.
What was your most memorable moment, if I could ask? Is if you have, I'm sure there's a ton of memorable moments, but do you have one most memorable moment during that year?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Certainly launching, landing, coming back. When the parachute opens to the Soyuz, it's a crazy ride. It's like going over Niagara Falls in a barrel while you're on fire. If I hated every minute of being in space for a year, I'd do it all over again for the last 20 minutes. I mean, it's just the most fun you've ever had. Those are memorable. I'd never done a spacewalk before, and I did 3 on this mission. So, getting outside the spacecraft in a vacuum. And, at one point I was kind of on the front of the space station as it's, hurtling through space, where I couldn't really see anything except the Earth in front of me. I couldn't see like the structure of the space station too well. Kind of felt like that guy Jack, the Leo DiCaprio character on the Titanic, on the King of the World kind of feeling. That was pretty memorable. A lot of memories. Yeah.
That's amazing. I know you have another book. I don't think it's out yet. Maybe I'm wrong. Infinite Wonder. Is that out yet? Has that been released?
Yeah. That's a picture book. It's like a coffee table book about space flight, my space flights, and it has a lot of pictures of the Earth in it. And has some words. Pretty light on words though, because it's a picture book.
Now they were all pictures you took. Yes, that you
Yeah, all but one of them. There's one picture in the book that I didn't take, but I liked it, so I borrowed it.
I think there's a really sweet story in your book Endurance, where you took a picture for your daughter from space and emailed it to her. I mean,
Okay.
she must have been thrilled. I think you tell.
I don't remember the story. You have to remind me. I haven't read that book in a few years.
Yeah, I mean, it was sweet. I mean, you had talked about the struggles, of trying to communicate and be part of her life while in space for a year. And you thought, I guess, that she would really enjoy, having her very own picture from space taken for her, and you took it, and I guess you must have emailed it. And how does that work? I mean, email actually worked while you were up in space.
It's magic.
It truly is. I mean, so I guess that helped you stay connected, email more than anything else. You were able to email your family.
Yeah. Yeah. We had email, we had phone, video conferences. It works through like satellites and kind of very similar to how this phone works. Yeah, people have a hard time. Like, how do you have, they say, how did you have a phone or email in space? That's crazy. Well, a lot of the satellites that we use to communicate through this thing go through satellites in space. So it's pretty common.
Well, not a lot of people realize that. So I think I was really struck also when I read the book that you're emailing. I'm like,
It's quite possible. You're in New Jersey, right?
Yes.
It's quite possible this signal is bouncing off a satellite here or there. We just don't realize it, right?
Yeah, that's wild. It's not something you think about, though. I mean, I
think about it.
Well, because you're up there. Your perspective, you have the advantage. I mean, your perspective is different than everybody else's, experience. I don't imagine you're in a very small elite group of people who can say they've been in space and they've lived in space.
Yep, it's pretty. It's kind of a privilege, I think, of getting to do this. And it's a privilege that's paid for by the U.S. taxpayer, and I never forget that. So thank you, taxpayers.
Did you come back and ever watch footage of yourself? I mean, of course, the news covered it somewhat rapidly, and they had footage of you, and floating.
I don't like watching myself on anything.
No,
I'm not all that interesting, at least to me.
I think because you're living it, maybe you don't realize how interesting you actually are.
Yeah, maybe.
So, I mean, I think that would have been one of the first things I did, to probably check out and see myself floating around. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I remember what it was like. I don't need to watch it on TV.
And you talked about even exercising, how exercising was part of your work day as to what you needed to do. And it really helped motivate you, I guess, to do it because it was part of the work day and not something you had to do in your social life.
Yeah.
Do you still do that? Do you still keep up to that exercise regimen?
Not what I did in space, but I still exercise, not, twice a day, 6 days a week.
Well, I have to say, reading your book was so interesting and so fascinating. I mean, for anyone, any little boy out there, who especially, I think you make a very good case for someone who's not doing well in school, and who maybe isn't the dean's list student, that you can change things for yourself. You can still chase a dream and make it happen. And I mean, that again is a story of hope. And we love to have people on who talk about hope and changing your life and your decisions, making a difference. And I think that's an important component of your story.
Yeah. I'm a good example of how if you, if you don't give up, you find some inspiration, you come up with a goal and a plan to get there, you can achieve some pretty remarkable things despite a slow start. I always, kind of preface when I talk about this story is, especially to kids, and that is, don't say, hey, I'm going to do bad in school because that guy did bad in school and he still became an astronaut, because I think that was a different time. It was easier to recover for me, and I don't think it would be as easy today. But I think the moral of the story is just never ever give up on yourself, and you can achieve some remarkable things in your life.
Which of course you did. Now, I think before and I know we're out of time, but before I let you go, I obviously want to thank you for what you did, because you did bring so much science into the world here that they were able to use the data, from what happened. But endurance was the right word for your book. And I just have to throw this out there because your story of what you had to endure getting into the program and, passing not only the physical testing, but the mental testing, what you had to go through to be that astronaut. And then what you had to endure for the year that you were there. And then even when you came back, like when you're having dinner with your family, like the next day, and how sick you felt. It's all about, your ability to endure through that. And it's such a compelling story.
Yeah, it was a good title for that book because it captures the idea of a year-long mission, but it also captures, all the lessons I learned throughout my life, and this idea of, keep your head down, learn what you need to learn, move forward, is kind of a secret to success. And also I wanted to honor one of my heroes, Ernest Shackleton, by borrowing his book title, which you're allowed to do, by the way, because you can't copyright a title.
Yeah, it's so worth the read for anyone who hasn't read his book. If you're interested in science or space, it's certainly, a great read from that perspective. But I think it's also anyone, who wants to read a story about someone who, as I said, started off as an underachiever and somewhat reinvented himself when, the passion just hit you. And certainly you had to have passion to take the path you did. I don't think the average person would have given up. I think, you went through a lot, and I'm not going to go through all the stories. They're certainly there and available in the book, but you endured quite a bit to achieve your goals. And that's a testament to your character and who you are as a person.
Well, thank you.
So I think we're out of time. I certainly enjoyed our chat. I could have gone on forever. I have tons of notes. I read the book and I was like, oh, this is fascinating. It's really hard to narrow it down to a few questions. Because how often do you get to speak to an astronaut, somebody who's lived in space? So I tried to focus on just the few things that I was particularly struck by.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Good talking to you. Do you still box at all, Seamus?
I don't, but would you believe that, have you heard about this celebrity boxing series?
I've seen some, like
YouTube stars and stuff. YouTube stars get done fighting, and they actually asked me to fight a guy. So I probably won't because I'm way past my boxing days. But then the guys that want me to fight are way past their boxing days. So that might happen. Probably not.
Who'd they ask you to fight?
They want me to fight. He's a middleweight, ex-former world champion, Keith Holmes.
Okay, so he a boxer, not like.
Oh yeah. So I said, why are you having me fight a professional fighter, world champion? All these guys are fighting YouTube stars. I don't want to fight a YouTube star.
You think you could beat that Jake? You think you could beat that Jake Paul guy?
I actually last night sent him a message. Sent to Damon. Damon is the guy who runs the show. I sent him a message saying, "Let's." I'm the same weight as Jake Paul. I says, "Let's legitimize Jake, see if he's any good, and let's get ready to rumble."
Yeah. How long do you think I'd last in a ring with you?
We could go 15 rounds easy.
No way. I was thinking maybe 15 seconds. That would be my goal.
No, we could dance around. We could do dance around,
All right, guys. Well, good talking to you. I got to take off.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care, Scott.
Bye-bye.
Bye.